Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Seth Goldstein, one of the pediatric surgeons at Lurie Children's Hospital. Really having a wonderful time here this afternoon and delighted to be able to moderate a panel that talks a little bit about the challenges of research and development, both actual and figurative in terms of collaboration, partnership, bureaucratic, and regulatory. I would like to introduce our panelists, other than myself. Actually, I'd like to give each panelist a moment to introduce themselves, please.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Moran, and I head up Kobe Cure, which is a nonprofit organization that was founded by Deerfield Management, which is very much for profit, but they started a public charity to tackle the really tough challenges in healthcare. And as prefaced by Juan's talk earlier, pediatric medical devices is one of those challenges. And so within Kobe Cure, we use a nonprofit model to advance the development of pediatric devices through investment, funding, resources, and leveraging our network in the ecosystem.
Before we'll continue the introductions, but Emma, let me just warm you up for 1 minute. Tell us about the Kobe Cure Fellowship. That was something we heard about for the first time this year.
Yeah, we're excited about that. So we recently launched what's called the Kobe Cure Fellowship for MedTech Innovation. We have 2 fellows in the room here today. And we started this fellowship in collaboration with the Pediatric Device Consortia, which we believe is a really key and crucial part in this ecosystem. And it was just started a couple of weeks ago, but we are funding 5 fellows at each of the Pediatric Device Consortia sites to work on a pediatric device development project in the area of cardiovascular critical care focus, which tends to be our focus from a mission standpoint. And with this program, we hope to, first off, create a larger pipeline of technologies that meets the needs of pediatric patients, but also educate and train innovators in the unique aspects of pediatric device development. It's unique, but there's a lot of opportunity in the space. And so we hope to create more people who are invested in this in the long run.
Very nice. Let's see who's lucky enough to have the next slide. Steve.
Hi. Part of the problem having such a great conference is amazing people, and I lost track of time talking to one of them. So sorry about that.
We forgive you.
So my name is Steve Zhu. I am a physician engineer. I have a faculty position actually at Northwestern in dermatology, pediatrics, and biomedical engineering. Currently on a leave of absence, joining the dark side of industry as CEO, co-founder of Cybel Health, where we develop wireless wearable monitors and sensors for pediatric and maternal patients.
Okay, Steve, tell us a little bit. You might be the best positioned in this room to talk about some of the actual design challenges when it comes to smaller folks and smaller devices. Is that real?
Yes. I think it's a real pain in the sense of like the challenges, but there's a huge amount of reward if you really think about, what you can do with it. I think pediatric devices is actually a little bit, I think, complicated in the sense where if you think about a premature neonate versus a term neonate versus a 1-month-old, a 2-month-old, a 3-month-old, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, 11-year-old, 18-year-old, you've got 7-8 markets, different anatomies and physiologies depending on these things. And the annoying thing about kids is that they grow, right? And so, so I think that is sort of that aspect of design that is so critically important to think about is even from a preemie who's 28, 27 weeks where we work on to when that baby leaves, right? They've almost doubled in size, right? And so you think about that, I think that requires a more complexity in design and thinking to adapt to that child and their growth, right? Past 18, it's all the same, right?
So you're saying that children are not just little adults, which my Lurie colleagues will appreciate as one of our mantras.
That's
Katie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Maskell. I am the Industry Engagement Manager here at Lurie Children's Hospital. So my role is all about sourcing partnerships and investments for our research and innovation programs. So really simply, I just love engaging with companies that are passionate about advancing pediatric health, and today is awesome for that. So thank you all for coming. Prior to being here, I helped launch a medical device accelerator program. It was VC and industry supported, and we invested in early stage entrepreneurs, provided them a bunch of resources, and really just did our best to try to increase their likelihood of bringing devices, their innovative technologies to market. So that's me.
That's great. Have children's hospitals always needed someone with your skill set?
Always needed? Probably yes. Always had? No.
No? So how did that come about?
Yeah, so in my role specifically, so I joined the team in January, and I think it's really sort of born out of this idea that's been cooking up for the last few years here at Lurie, and some of my colleagues are here today, that we are, really thinking about how can we build that connective tissue from our institution out into the world. So I think in the introduction, we heard Dr. Shanley talking about this great idea-rich environment we have, these resources, these fantastic clinicians that are really, really close to unmet clinical needs, that they know best, they deal with it every day, they experience all the pain points. And being able to connect that to folks on the outside that have, I think back to Juan's picture, the piggy bank and the other types of resources that you need to really build these devices and get it beyond our walls. That was sort of the call to forming the team and bringing my expertise here.
And I can attest to the benefits of that, as you know. Nick, please.
Hi, I'm Nick Rydberg. I'm the Vice President Engineering for a company called Minnesota Health Solutions. We're located in Minnesota, of course, kind of a med tech area. But we really are an engineering firm or a technology incubator, as I'll say, with the expertise of a lot of cardiovascular devices, but also a lot of pediatric devices. And what makes us really unique is we have the background of mechanical software, electrical engineering, as well as quite a few staff scientists on the payroll as well. But outside of the engineering and building the devices, we also help companies go after non-dilutive grant funding. And that's a big area that we can help acquire the funding, execute the funding, manage the funding from start to finish, as well as help build the product for you as well and get it all the way through clinical study to FDA submission.
That's very nicely described. Okay, will you tease this crowd? What are some of the specific mechanisms that you all have found for funding pediatric devices?
Yeah, I think as probably quite a few people in here know, probably the top target that we go after are SBIR grants from the NIH. Typically with the pediatric devices, that's through the NICHD, while their budget, as Juan talked to earlier, is significantly smaller than NHLBI and NIA. Unfortunately, they do have a really keen interest in targeting the underserved pediatric population with these devices, especially when it comes to ventilation, other securement devices. They really like to target those areas and fund those areas for pediatrics.
Okay, well said. And then we have a final panelist joining us remotely, I believe.
All right. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. I'm assuming you want me to give an introduction.
Yes, well, please, if you're able.
Sure. Vasoom Piras. I serve as the Chief Medical Officer and Director for Pediatrics and Special Populations at the FDA Center for Device and Radiological Health. My clinical background is in pediatrics, pediatric cardiology, and adult congenital cardiology. And prior to coming to the FDA, I was an endowed professor and chief of a program in Texas and still do some clinical time here locally at Children's National.
We're delighted to have you, and the FDA has already been mentioned a number of times this afternoon. Can you tell us a little bit about your 10,000-foot view of what you have seen happening and ongoing about the FDA's approach to pediatric medical devices?
Yeah, I know. I think there's a rich history here from the time that I started. Part of the reason I think I was asked to take this role was to start to build infrastructure, understanding, education, and processes to help support pediatric device innovation. And I know this is one of those things that everyone doesn't always connect all the dots, but a great deal of effort internally has led to a number of program improvements and enhancements, especially with all the work that we do with the PDCs, to begin to help not only clarify the needs nationally and certainly globally to develop more devices specifically designed, evaluated, and labeled for pediatrics, but also to ensure that we're setting up regulatory programs and processes that can help support that. One of the areas that people may have heard of during the earlier in the conference or just know about is the work that we've done with developing the ChipMD/PMD PPP process. So we can certainly get into that conversation as well, but I'll hold that for later if there's interest.
Okay, wonderful. So we know the panel now. That's an impressive breadth of expertise. Can I just throw out a question about what needs to happen for collaboration and partnerships? Vasum said connecting the dots. I like that. None of this happens in a silo. Emma, will you start us off about how can folks, leverage and harmonize their skills for this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's always drawn me to the pediatric device world, and my background's in large medical device industry that didn't have a ton of pediatric focus, is that there's really this sense of community, and that starts with the healthcare providers, whether those are surgeons or cardiologists or nurses, all the way down to the patients and their families. And then, all the CEOs and companies working in this space, there's a real sense of community and a real sense of wanting to help each other. So especially as startup companies, you're not going to have all the skill sets out there. But I'm sure there's plenty of people who are willing to talk to you and connect you with the right experts in the ecosystem to move your product forward. So just, say, be open to collaboration and partnership and meeting new people. And the community wants everybody to succeed. There's a huge need, and to be open to that. And I'm sure through the PDC program, CTIP, the others, as well as your peers, go and ask, and someone will probably help.
Katie, will you add to that?
Yeah, I think so. On the idea of like, how can we collaborate more? How can we connect more? I think to maybe state the obvious, events like this are truly so important as you think about building the roads that connect all the different players. And I think the more that we, as the change makers in the room, can think about how can we continue to expand that ecosystem, because I think when you're trying to solve really hard problems, one of the things that can be helpful is cross-pollination from different types of problem solvers. And I think you see this in tech innovation a lot, but that the more that you can be socializing the issues that you face and the problems you're trying to solve with people that are tangential to where you are, you get new inputs about how to approach them and how to think creatively to move really meaningful issues forward and sort of shift the conversation. So I think I guess the point would really be to try to like expand who's in this room a year from now.
Yeah, and I want to invite Nick and Steve, and also if you have examples of successful collaborations, I think you two both might have insights.
Yeah, when I think of like successful collaborations in pediatric, I kind of look at it more of a matchmaker of collaboration. It's kind of look, right? I'm trying to piece a puzzle together. You have an idea that's going to make a child's life better, whether that's in the hospital, at home care. That idea needs to get made. Well, my company can make it, right? But we don't know how to clinical study it. So we need to get a clinical team on board, and we're not going to manufacture it. We need to get an industry partner on board. And how do you get all that partnership together and rolled into one path to make a successful device? That's kind of what I look at as the biggest partner, and how do you get there? And so you have there's thousands and thousands of ideas and researchers and physicians, many in this room, that have ideas. And there's lots of industry that has ideas too. And there's still a big gap there, in my opinion. And how do you bridge that gap? And that's really what we've looked at, is to kind of tackle that and use SBIR funding to do that. And whether that's taking the idea from the researcher and getting the SBIR, it's easy to get a collaborator on board that wants to bring it to market when you have $2 million for a grant, right? And vice versa from an industry partner, they have great ideas too. They don't know if it's going to work. And so how do you convince them to say, hey, it's going to work? Well, that grant funding can do that for you, and it can get a good clinical study so that industry partner wants to bring it to market, even though, because any good idea can die pretty quickly without money, unfortunately, or a good clinical study and research that shows that it works well, right? So that's really the partnerships and the successful collaborations that I like to look at.
I guess I give an example that actually was just born right here. My co-founder is a very prominent professor in engineering here, kind of the father of flexible electronics and really thin, soft electronics. And he gives a talk at a dermatology conference. I'm a dermatologist by specialty, and the audience is my chair, who is a pediatric dermatologist here at Lurie and chair of derm at Northwestern, is in the front row. She comes up to him after and says, "We need to be using this in the NICU." And he's like, "What's the NICU?" And so, from there is where, our company really started, is how do we take the, technology invented in engineering and apply it to a use case that I think is so powerful, which is neonatal intensive care, where wireless matters the most, right? Where kangaroo care seems to lead to mortality benefit beyond advantages to pediatric devices and incredible challenges. I think one of the advantages is absolutely the unmet need, right? And the ability to really, I think what's critical here is the connection between the clinical need, clinician experts, and technologists, particularly in this space, because the knowledge is somewhat specialized, right? And I think that that's the other side of it. And I think the best people are mission driven, and it's hard not to be mission driven when you're doing pediatric device development. But the other side, I think the things that are challenging is linking up the reimbursement, the regulatory, the development, process. There's definitely a commercial aspect that has to be considered, and I think those are the disadvantaged sides that have to do that. But I think overall, I would say pediatric devices benefit particularly much in that deep clinical technology relationship.
Can I add just
I
one
hope you
point
will.
onto what Nick was talking about when he said that why ideas or why partnerships fail? I think to call back to the panel that we saw earlier, I think it's true in this setting too, that trust in partnerships is really important. And to this NICU example, I think when you're collaborating with people from different sectors or different hospitals or from hospital to industry, it's like you're speaking different languages sometimes, truly. And I think that, the trust piece that underlies all of it, maybe isn't the most obvious reason why partnerships don't work, but I think that often some of those friction points come from a lack of understanding of who am I engaging with on the other side and what are their motivations. And so I think that as we continue to think about how do we partner and partner effectively, that has to sort of be at the forefront of how we engage and build relationships.
Well said. Vasoom, will you comment on some of that, particularly, this when you hear the phrase cross-pollination and things like that, that's the same considerations as every other, spectrum of idea the FDA would see, or you think that has some unique facets?
Yeah, it's a good question and a good point. I think I think if we take this up and kind of bring up that up one level and look at this from a national ecosystem standpoint, we can certainly look at it from a global ecosystem standpoint, but let's focus nationally for right now for this conference. There's a great deal here when we talk about cross-pollination, and the way that I have attempted to help move the agency forward with respect to supporting innovation in the pediatric medical device space is to begin to think about how can we leverage the existing strengths or comparative advantages of the different organizations and stakeholders within the ecosystem, bringing them together, creating integration, and thereby synergistically creating processes and sustainable ecosystems that help to support all of the innovation that we're talking about here, right? Because the more we can create easily accessible and sustainable systems that support the innovators to be able to innovate, the better off the translation of technology will be for the benefits of healthcare and specifically pediatric healthcare. There's a lot more there, but
Yes,
happy to dive in.
okay, a short follow-up to that. How much of that is public-private partnership? And then I'll also solicit our in-person panelists.
Yeah, one of the major national initiatives that we've moved forward is the ShipMD, PMD, PPP work. We're currently, I think it's been amazing to see the amount of interest from stakeholders and everybody coming around a strategic framework that potentially has the capability of beginning to move the needle with respect to pediatric medical device innovation. And the fact that we have not only our federal HHS partners on board, including NIH and BARDA, but also the Foundation for the NIH that is currently leading this phase 2 of development, along with so many other stakeholders, including Emma's team at CobiCure, AdvaMed, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and again, so many other payers and other health systems involved. It represents not only a great willingness and importance that this entire community applies to this need, this longstanding public health issue, where medical devices have not been able to be developed substantially for pediatrics, but also the understanding that the strategic framework could potentially make a difference and really begin to shift the needle. Because what we've seen at the FDA and what I've published on for a number of years now is that we're not seeing a great movement or difference with respect to the percentage of medical devices, especially our PMAs and HDEs, that are being actually labeled for children, which also implies that they're not necessarily specifically designed or evaluated for children. But we know very well that many of these devices, greater than 90% or more, are continuing to be used off-label in children. And that poses a potential public health issue, and it exposes children to a benefit risk profile that hasn't been evaluated prior to marketing, at least not evaluated by the FDA. So we want to get to a system that supports greater equitable healthcare for all populations, and all populations means pediatrics as well.
Please, Steve.
I want to follow up on that because, at Cybele Health, we have two clearances we're very proud of. One is in neonatal monitoring, specifically any gestational age to 2 years for a set of vital signs for resuscitation in neonates. And the other clearance we have is in adolescents, so 12 years and up. And, I think Vasoom's point is really good because, in the clearance we have for adolescents and above, it was a bit opportunistic. It's an adult product, an adult sensor. It's small enough to fit with adolescents, but we as a for-profit, investor-backed company have to think about market and market opportunities. And I think the bright spot of it actually is that we have realized that having that adolescent clearance and up has actually been a huge differentiator for us, because all the other competitors we have are 21 years and up, and it just gives us more coverage, and it allows us to do adolescent remote patient monitoring. It allows us to do monitoring on gen peds and wards and things like that, where you have a lot of patients that need our technology. And so I think that's kind of a dual purpose win, right? That kind of enables that. I think the neonatal side, I would say, was specifically designed, right? And that was really driven by the major unmet need, but far more expensive if you really think about the context and the payoff and the ROI. And so I think there needs to be mechanisms to kind of support both, right? Those that are, devices that are truly designed for adults and targeting that market, but don't have a unfavorable risk benefit profile for certain pediatric populations. And then those that are designed for kids, right? And approved for that, I think needs a certain level, a different level of support.
Okay, a couple more minutes. I'm biased, but I think a lot of these pollination efforts start with the observations of clinicians, and then it's about all the crossing and the leveraging. And so some of those folks are in the audience. What advice do you have for the very fledgling ideas? How can, because these are very big picture. Some of them go very deep into the product, but at what point in the process do you need to wrap your mind around some of these things?
I'm happy to chime in if, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you don't have to figure it all out on day one, that I think it's a process. And so if you're a person that's out there that has an idea, I think that if you think too much about all these big scale things, you'll never do it. You'll never begin on the journey. And so I think that I don't know the answer to your question of when do you have to think about it, but I would offer, I think it's not at the very first step. It's maybe like 2.5 or 3. It's early because it's important. But I think that for the note of encouragement, that it takes a whole bunch of brains together to figure out how to build a device, bring it to market in a really safe and kid-first way, and then to sell it and to make sure that you have some sustainability within that. That it's just a process. So don't be discouraged, and don't feel like you have to figure it all out on day one.
If
Those
I
are
can chime in, I
encouraging.
think
What were you going to add to that, Vasoon? Yes, please.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, despite the fact that, at the FDA, we really need to think about things from a global systems standpoint. We certainly want to recognize how those systems and processes and programs that we put into place, how they are actually affect the individual innovator, the individual company, because without that type of support, they can't get to a sustainable business model that ensures that there's accessibility of those devices for children. So that being considered, one of the key programs that we have is the PDCs, right? I think all of you know that. CTIP is obviously putting this on. I think if you were going to give a piece of advice to a new innovator in the space, an academic thinking about an idea, somebody who has an idea getting set up in their garage, the Pediatric Device Consortia program is really well situated to be able to provide some level of guidance across the total product lifecycle for any level of innovator, especially those that are just entering the area. And we recognize in the entire economy of pediatric medical device development that the great majority of innovation is occurring at that smaller level. It's not always occurring at the level of the major strategics. So we definitely want to continue to support and foster innovation in the space at that nascent level, so that there continues to be a pipeline of technologies that are being translated for the benefits of pediatric healthcare.
Well, I've been warned that Juan runs a tight ship. Maybe that was my that was my alarm. That I think we can yield the floor to the next session. But I want to really thank all the panelists today. I enjoyed that.